Mark Masters with the tough questions for Craig Berube. Jay Onrait with the tough questions for Bryan Hayes. It's time for Harvey's Hot Takes. Brian, last week on this very show, you said the Leafs needed a signature win, and it needed to come against the Colorado Avalanche, and it happened. In fact, they beat the Avs, they beat the Flames, they beat the Rangers last week. It was all looking so great, Brian, until that Saturday night tilt with the Nashville Predators where they blew a 2-goal lead and lose 5-2. What's your sense of the temperature of Leafs Nation following that Saturday night loss?
I think the temperature's pretty high at this point. I think there is a lot of frustration coming off that game because you pointed out the facts. I mean, Nashville, they've been terrible this year. They haven't been able to score. And the Leafs dominated that first period, and they're up 2-0. All they had to do was come alive in the second period, and that game's over, and you bank 2 points. But they fall asleep at the first intermission. Nashville decides to come alive, and they throw away 2 points. And I think there's frustration from that. And I think Leaf fans are bracing for impact here because the regular season actually means something down the stretch for the Maple Leafs for the first time in a long time because, you know, in past years, there has been a pace car in the Atlantic Division that has been running away from the Leafs, from the second seed, from the third seed, from the wild card teams. We've seen it with Florida in the past. We saw it with Boston a couple of years ago, Tampa for all those years. And the Leafs haven't been a part of that race. So with 12 games to go, Leaf fans in past years have really been putting their feet up and saying, let's see what happens come playoff time. Wake me up in the playoffs. You know the Leafs are going there. Maybe they're fighting for home ice. Maybe there's some concerns over health issues. Maybe there's some concerns over what the lines are going to look like. But it's very different this year because the Maple Leafs are actually playing for something. And this is why Leaf fans are bracing for impact. Because when there's something on the line over the last decade, if not more than that, generally speaking, it has gone against the Maple Leafs. And it has hit Leaf fans where it hurts. And that's what stings about Saturday night in Nashville. Every team's going to lose games. Over the course of 82, you can look back and do a full forensic audit and say, didn't like this effort, didn't like that blown lead, whatever it might be. But it's crunch time now. And Florida's not taking off. And Tampa's not taking off. And the Leafs, as of Saturday, if they held on to win that game, which they should have until they fell asleep, would have been leading the Atlantic Division. And I would go back to that game against San Jose a couple of weeks ago when they were at home, leading 2-0 against literally the worst team in the league at home, and they threw away a point. They end up losing in a shootout. These are the type of games and these are the type of moments that bother Leaf fans most because this is supposed to be where leadership steps up, where maturity steps up. You have more skill, you have more talent, and you should have more willpower because you're playing for something compared to Nashville, compared to San Jose, where the Leafs were not able to do that and were not able to punch the ticket. So Leaf fans are bracing for impact right now because it would be really disappointing if you can't close this. They've got 12 games left. They're only 2 points back of Florida. They've got a game in hand. They play the Panthers 2 more times. They play Tampa 1 more time. They still have control of this. They still have an opportunity to win the division, and it would be so advantageous because then you're avoiding the state of Florida. Then you're playing an inferior team in the first round. Doesn't guarantee anything. As you know, bracing for impact will continue into the first round. It doesn't matter who they play for Leaf fans, and obviously they're deserving of that based on their history. But there's something on the line here, and Leaf fans, that's why Saturday night stung, right? And I think other fans around the league, I'm not sure they can quite understand that because, again, it's, hey, everyone loses. Everyone has bad periods. Everyone throws things away. But a lot of other teams, and especially the best teams in the league, they seize opportunities. The Leafs have not been able to do it. This leadership group has not been able to lead them to that. And Saturday, it really poked at that bear. So let's see if they get back on the saddle. They've got a light schedule coming up. Philly on Tuesday, they should win that game. Then they're in San Jose looking for redemption. They should win that game. And like I said, 2 more against Florida, another one against Tampa. They can redeem themselves here. Winning that division is big. Leaf fans are feeling it already. It's kind of got a playoff atmosphere to it, which, again, leads to some anxiety and, as I've been saying, bracing for impact.
A lot of anxiety for Blue Jays fans, too, though the team was pretty terrific in spring training despite all the drama off the field. The question for you, Bryan Hayes, as Toronto gets set to start their season on Thursday, best case scenario for the Blue Jays this season and worst case scenario for the Blue Jays this season is what in your mind?
Well, I think if you're a fan, let me answer the worst case scenario. It's if you're right in the middle ground, Jay. If they finish with 84 wins, 85 wins, miss the playoffs, what that means is the front office will sell that they're really close. that they're actually really right there. And if it wasn't for a game or two or an injury or two or maybe one or two players that had a down year, they would have punched a ticket and made the playoffs. And what that will likely mean is Schneider returns, Atkins returns, Shapiro returns. They come back with a similar core, and they try to continue to run with it. I think that's the worst-case scenario, being right in the middle, right? Not quite good enough, but not awful enough where ownership finally snaps out of it and realizes something's got to change here. So that's the worst-case scenario, and I think that's a pretty easy one to answer. Best-case scenario clearly is to make the playoffs. I mean, that's what their goal is. That's what Blue Jay fans want, even though Jays fans are bitter. You know, they're not happy with the way things have played out in past years, deservedly so. They're no different than any other fan base in pro sports. Very fickle. If the Jays have a hot spring and are in the hunt, people will get back on the bandwagon. And, of course, you're rooting for your team to have success. And I think when you look at the American League and the American League East, I don't see powerhouses here. I think the Yankees have been hurt clearly with their rotation and losing Soto. I think Baltimore didn't have an active offseason. I'm very curious to see what the Orioles look like. The Red Sox are moving in a better direction. Very good pitching staff. They got some young bats that are coming up. They added a couple of pieces like Bregman in the offseason, but they got to take that next step before they truly prove it. So I think the Jays can paint a picture here where if a few things go their way, they can be competitive. And that's in their best interest. Vladdy have a great year. Bo Bichette have a great year. Santander have a great debut year as a Blue Jay. Get this bullpen going in the right direction because it was a disaster last year. If those boxes are checked, they could get to 88, 89 wins. That'll be enough. That won't win you the division, but they never really compete for the division. But that'll be enough for a wild card. So that is the best case scenario. But staying within that world, the other option for best case scenario, 1B if you will, Jay, is for it to be an absolute disaster. To finish with 70 wins, 72 wins, replicate what you did last year, 74 wins. That will finally shine the light on Shapiro, Atkins, everybody involved. And I think what that will set up for is likely a complete overhaul of the organization, where you've got new management, you've got a new vision, probably a new timeline in terms of when you turn things around and where you go here. So I'm not rooting for that. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but being in the middle is the worst case scenario, and then pick one or the other. And again, I think they can compete if they stay healthy. I think they're top heavy offensively. That bullpen's got to be there. But if it's not going to happen, be awful. Be a disaster. Move on from Shapiro. Move on from Atkins. Move on from management. Move on from all of it. Possibly Vladdy. Possibly Bichette. We'll get to that momentarily. But at least be decisive by the end of the year.
You know, and you said it. We got to get to Guerrero and Bichette because, you know, when the deal didn't initially get done with Guerrero before spring training, Steve Phillips and others, you know, said that's it. You know, he's probably not coming back. He's probably gone. Well, since then, Bryan, and throughout spring training, you know, there's been different reports that have come out about what Vladdy's asking for. Shapiro's been vocal, saying he's still optimistic he can get a deal done with Vladdy. So in your mind, do you believe that the Jays do get Vladdy Guerrero Jr. extended? And what about Bo Bichette? We've barely been talking about him. Can they get him done as well?
I think it's going to come down to the owner. And I think that's really where the Mark Shapiro comments are coming from. I think the owner here, the Blue Jays, Edward Rogers, is the one that will step in and say, just pay him. Like, just get it done. And I do think there's a chance that happens. And I think maybe that's the direction we're moving in. Because Mark Shapiro is saying what he said publicly, that he's optimistic it will happen and they will get it done. He's a smart guy. Mark's been around baseball for a long, long time. He knows those comments are going to ring out, and people are going to hold him to that. And I'm not sure he would have been comfortable saying that weeks before, months before, years before, but he said it. And it's out there, and it's on the record now. And I think it's more than likely ownership that is pushing him in that direction, because you can't just get pushed around by Steve Cohen and the Mets all the time, or the New York Yankees, or the Dodgers, or the Red Sox, or the Rangers, or the Astros. If you want to be a big game player, you got to be able to sign big name players, and you got to be willing to write a check that is going to make you uncomfortable, that is going to push a player into a stratosphere that is completely unheard of, especially with the Blue Jays, because the largest contract they've ever signed is George Springer. Like, they've never given anyone $200 million in a deal, let alone 400, 500, 600. So I think it's going to come down to the owner, because I do think Vladdy wants to stay. And I think if the owner wants him to stay, he'll pay him. And whether that's between now and opening day on Thursday, at some point during the year or possibly next offseason, it's going to come down to the owner. And I get the impression like that very well could happen. With Bichette, I think it comes down to how he plays, Jay. And you're right, it's been awfully quiet about him, a guy who's really been a pillar of this organization now for years. He and Vladdy came up together. And at times, they have kind of jockeyed for position as face of the franchise, as the marquee guy, as the guy that would sell the most jerseys and the most tickets and lead to the most conversation among fans. And last year, it was a disaster for him. It was an absolute disaster. But he had a great spring. He's healthy. He's going to play every single day. If that health stays up, he's likely going to lead off. He's at times going to clean up. He's going to be in a position where they need him. And he needs them. He needs to have a big season to get his career back on the trajectory that it was just a couple of years ago. And I think if he has a big year and Vladdy stays, then there is a chance Bo will stay as well. And if you can tie it all together, and this is uber optimistic, but they get up to 88, 89, 90 wins, they make the playoffs, you sign Vlad, you sign Bo, that's a positive sign for fans. That's what fans want. They want superstars. They want players they know. These guys are both in their prime. They're homegrown. By all accounts, they like playing with each other, and they want to play with each other into the future. So there's a lot of different things that have to be tied together here. I think with Vladdy and his number, it's ownership that's going to have to really push that over the finish line. With Bichette and his possible future in Toronto, I think it's on Bo. I think he's got to stay healthy, and I think he's got to perform. If he does it, I think the Jays will want to keep him, and they should want to keep him. And again, if that ends up happening, they win, Vladdy stays, Bo stays, kumbaya in Toronto, Jays fans will be happy.
And listen, they open the season with a 4-game set against their AL East rivals in Baltimore. Should they lose all 4 of those games, it's not such a bad case scenario, because that means it should be a very fiery edition next week of Harvey's Hot Takes with Bryan Hayes.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Customize your burger and get it delivered from our app to your door. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.